One of the things that my wife and I enjoy doing is to have a little garden at home. And we planted some things about the end of February, early March, and we are starting to reap the benefits of that planting. We've got some snow peas happening. We've got some beetroot. We've had some lettuce and some baby spinach and some beans. The beans have done well for whatever reason. And we put some cauliflowers plants in, and the moths have had a great feed of the cauliflower plants. Whether we get anything off them, I'm not quite sure. But if anyone's got some tips about how to grow good cauliflowers, I'd love to hear from you. The other thing that we're enjoying at the moment, we put in a couple of citrus trees some years back. And we have an orange tree. It grows to a maximum of about 2 metres, 2.5 metres, something like that. Last year we had a fantastic crop. This year not so good, but still some lovely oranges. And for the first time, our mandarin tree bore fruit this year. And we had about probably 12 or 16 or something mandarins. But one of the things that we love at breakfast time is to have our cereal and then go outside and pick an orange from the orange tree and bring it inside. It's cold because it's been outside overnight on our cold mornings. It's like being in the fridge, and to peel it and to eat it fresh off the tree. We used to sing a song in Sabbath school. I like to eat an orange picked from the orange tree. Remember that song? No? Okay. Am I that old? Anyway, we love doing this. One of the simple little joys is to pick a fresh orange off our orange tree and eat it about 5 minutes later. And it's juicy, and it's sweet, and it's fresh, and it's a little delight that we are enjoying at the moment, and we'll do so for the next week or so until we've used them all up. God has done some amazing things in creation. And as we work in our garden, one of the things we notice is all of the little insects and so forth that you come across. And like you, we have ants in our garden. And from time to time you see them running up and down and so forth. And I'm convinced that ants know when the weather is going to change. Have you noticed that? What do? If it's going to rain in the next couple of days, they are going flat out. They're scurrying around and they're building their nests up, or they're storing food, or they're doing all sorts of things to get ready for the wet weather that is coming. And I don't know how they do it, like the birds that fly from Florida across to Mexico. I have no idea how they do that. A little bird about that size flying thousands of kilometres without a break. How do they do that? Amazing. And these little ants somehow can pick the change in barometric pressure. They know that it's going to rain. Interestingly enough, Solomon, you remember, refers to the ants in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6. You know the text well. We've probably memorised it in Pathfinders. Go to the ants, the King James Version says. What's the next bit? You sluggard. Excuse me, what is a sluggard? Anybody know? I actually had to look it up because it's an old word that we don't use very much. A sluggard, according to the dictionary, is a person who is habitually inactive or lazy. Go to the ant, consider her ways and be wise. Look at creation, because every time we look at creation, there is something that we can learn out of it. But all is not well in the world of nature, at least in people's understanding of how it came to be. How did we get it? Where did nature come from? Most people in the scientific community leave God out of the equation and believe that nature evolved gradually over vast periods of time. What do we do with that tension? What do we do with the science creation debate where there is this difference of views, difference of opinion? Is it one or the other? Is it possible to believe in both? Is science based on fact and creation based on faith? Or is there evidence for both? Now, if I were a betting man, and I'm not, it would be safe to say that every nature program that you have recently seen on TV has evolution as its foundation, right? Fossils described as tens or millions of years old. Rocks that are even older. The Big Bang is estimated to have occurred about 3.5 billion years ago. Even in this country of Australia, it is claimed that Aboriginals have lived here for at least 50,000 years. Now, when you hear that information, when you watch the programs, what goes through your mind? All of the evidence, it seems to be on the side of science. If we look at the growth of atheism, this is from America, but you can see there, hopefully, the various generations of elders, boomers, Gen Xers, millenniums, and then you come to Gen Z, and you'll notice that for the others, atheists among the US population is around about 5-6%, but when you get to Gen Z, it more than doubles the current generation. And I would suggest that it's the same here in Australia. So what do we do with this tension? How do we live with it? Is it the fact that on one side you have scientists, hundreds, thousands of them, textbooks, university courses, documentary makers, evidence, and on the other side you have belief in creation? Is that what it's like? The prophet Jeremiah is writing at a critical time in the history of the ancient Middle East. He's concerned about being invaded from the north because the Babylonians are flexing their muscle. And he fears that an invasion is imminent. And he gets some counsel and he thinks about the situation and he says, well, we're not strong enough to fight the Babylonians on our own. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And the prophet Jeremiah comes to the king and says, King, do not worry about the Babylonians. We need to put our trust in God. He will look after us. He will care for us. But the king doesn't take the advice. And so he goes down he sends some of his staff down to Egypt and says, listen, it looks like we're going to get invaded from the north. Will you come and help us? And the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, says, well, yes, we'll help you at a price. Turn with me to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 10, and we'll pick up a little of the commentary. The book of Jeremiah, chapter 10, reading from verse 1, and I'm using the New King James this morning. Jeremiah, chapter 10, reading from verse 1. Notice what Jeremiah writes. Jeremiah, chapter 10, reading from verse 1. Hear the word which the Lord speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the Gentiles are dismayed at them, for the customs of the peoples are futile. For one cuts a tree in the forest, the work of the hands of the workman, and with the axe. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers, so that it will not topple. They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried, because they cannot go by themselves. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, nor can they do any good. What's Jeremiah talking about here? God is challenging the people. Instead of putting their trust in him, the people put their trust in earthly powers and the gods of the nations around them. And God is almost having this sarcastic conversation with the people. And he says to the people, let me see if I've got this right. So you have somebody who goes out and cuts down a tree, and you make a shape out of that tree, and you cover it with silver and gold, and then you fasten it with nails to a board so that it won't tip over because it can't stand there by itself, and then it has to be carried because it can't move by itself, and you bow down and you worship this thing. Have I got that right? And you can imagine what's going through God's mind. I don't need to be nailed down so that I won't fall over. I can move by myself. I can listen. I can hear. I've got eyes. I can speak. Let's pick it up in verse 6. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 6. Inasmuch as there is none like you, O Lord. You are great, your name is great in might. Who would not fear you, O King of the nations? For this is your rightful due, for among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there is what? There is none. Thank you. Good man. There is none like you. Verse 8, they are altogether dull-hearted and foolish. All of these other gods, a wooden idol is a worthless doctrine. Come down to verse 10. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God, the everlasting King. At his wrath the earth will tremble, and the nations will not be able to endure his indignation. What is it that sets the God of the heavens apart from these other idols? Jeremiah draws this huge contrast between the living God and these idols. Come down to let's notice it in verse 11. Thus you shall say to them, the gods that have not, what's the next bit? The gods that have not made the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. He has made the earth by his power. He has established the world by his wisdom. He has stretched out the heavens at his discretion. And when he utters his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens. He causes the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain. He brings the wind out of the treasuries. Notice verse 16. The portion of Jacob is not with them, for he is the what? Give this man a microphone. He is, well done. Have you got the same version that I've got this morning? It's a good version. I like this version. He is the maker of all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. What is the one thing that sets the God of heaven apart from all other gods that are ever worshipped? Is that he is the creator God. We cannot get away from that if we take the Bible seriously. The word to create in the Hebrew, bara, in the beginning God created. That word is only, that verb is only ever connected with God. It is never used in connection with human beings. God as the creator is at the beginning of the Bible, at the end, all the way through. You cannot get away from it. Genesis 1 verse 1, we know the verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Thank you. In the time of Jesus, John the disciple wrote, chapter 1 verse 1 and 3, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, he was in the beginning with God. Verse 3, all things were made through him. And without him, nothing was made that has been made. The first angel's message, Revelation 14:6, we know that text very well. Fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. And then to cap things off at the end of the millennium, God does it again. This time he recreates. Revelation 21 verse 5, then he who sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. God as creator is at the beginning of the Bible, the end of the Bible, and all the way through. You can't get away from it. So what do we do with this tension? How do we live with it when it seems that on the one side you have science and scientists and evidence, on the other side you have Scripture and the story of creation? Let me make a couple of points. Firstly, don't believe everything you read and hear. I have a tremendous amount of respect for David Attenborough. Every night on free-to-air television, you can watch one of his documentaries. They're on every day. And like you, I watched Blue Planet 2, his latest series. Amazing footage. 3 or 4 years to put that series together because some events that they captured on film only happen once, for a day or two. And if you miss that, you've got to come back the next year. Incredible footage. He flies the flag for conservation. He has a list of awards and honours as long as your arm. Google him and find out. In 1974, he was given a commander of the Order of the British Empire. 1985, he received a knighthood. 2005, Order of Merit, and it goes on and on. But having said that, he makes some interesting observations in his DVD series, The Life of Mammals, which I was given as a gift, I think a birthday present or a Christmas present. And that series starts right here in Australia. We'll show a little clip in a moment, but let's just remind ourselves, what's the definition of a mammal? Oh yeah, you have bright people here. Suckle their young, all right? They have hair and they're warm-blooded. 3 characteristics of a mammal. Suckle their young, warm-blooded, and they have hair. Now, Attenborough makes the claim that here in Australia we have evidence of the evolution of mammals. He claims that the oldest mammals are the echidnas and the platypus. And what is unique about those 2 animals? They are... Have you read my notes? They are the only mammals that lay eggs. Bright people here in Penrith. Do your research well. Then it is claimed that mammals thrived, diversified, and changed over millions of years until we get to the kangaroo, which don't lay eggs, but give birth to live young, coming out of the birth canal, climbing up the fur into the pouch, right? And there they stay for at least, I think it's 9 or 12 months in the pouch. Interestingly enough, with a kangaroo, the mother's milk constantly changes chemical composition to allow for the right nutrients for that little baby Joey to grow. That's just a little aside. So from egg-laying mammals, we have mammals that give birth to live young. And then the claim is made that mammals changed again until we get to mammals where the young are born in a placenta or a sac, connected by an umbilical cord, such as cows and sheep, as well as lions and bears in other countries of the world. Now, with all due respect to Mr. Attenborough, and not claiming to be a scientist at all, I do have a couple of questions. If mammals evolved from egg-laying animals to those born with live young without shells, to those born in a placenta, why is it that we still have egg-laying mammals today? If some changed millions of years ago, why didn't they all change? Attenborough goes on to claim that mammals came from egg-laying reptiles because you've got to go back to a common ancestor. But reptiles are cold-blooded, not warm-blooded. And if mammals came from egg-laying reptiles, how do you get from cold-blooded to warm-blooded? What was the process? Where is the evidence? And if they did that, why did they do that? Cold-blooded works fine for reptiles. And on these cold days, and probably around your place too, you see lizards and stuff come out and sun themselves in the sun, right? Because they have no warmth in themselves. They've got to get warmth from the sun. And so they come out and sun themselves. We've got a beautiful little shiny coated lizard. I don't know what the name of them is, but it's about this long that comes around our place, and he comes out in the warmer weather and suns himself. Beautiful animal. And how does a mammal start suddenly producing milk? What were the intervening stages? And again, perhaps the most telling question, why? Reptiles don't produce milk. They have no need of it. They lived comfortably without it. So why start producing milk? David Attenborough and his research team make these sweeping statements and broad generalizations that when you start to pull them apart and consider them carefully, require more faith to believe in than it takes to believe in God as the Creator God. I'd like to play you this clip. It's just a short clip, but it's about Dorbenton bats. I don't know if you know much about Dorbenton bats, but I'd like you to listen carefully to what David Attenborough says in his commentary about these Dorbenton bats. If we could just play that clip. Thanks, Mark.
Now, at night, there are even more flying insects than there were during the day. And down by the mill stream, there's a colony of Dorbenton's bats that are already stirring. Their little faces are so like a shrew's that it's easy to imagine shrew-like ancestors in the trees, jumping from branch to branch, chasing insects. Ever larger flaps of skin between their fingers help to extend those jumps until, eventually, they could fly. And how they can fly. The change from a scurrying animal like a shrew to a fluttering bat is surely the most magical in the whole history of the mammals. The bat's mastery of flight is so complete that few insects can outmaneuver them in the air. The bat scoops up the moth with the membrane around its tail and then passes it forward to the mouth.
Thank you, Mark. Did you notice what David Attenborough said in that clip? Talking about the Dorbenton bats, their faces are so like a shrew that it is easy to imagine their shrew-like ancestors in the trees, jumping from branch to branch, chasing insects. Ever larger flaps of skin between their fingers helped to extend those jumps until eventually they could fly. The change from a scurrying animal like a shrew to a fluttering bat is surely the most magical in the whole history of mammals. If we can just go to, sorry. All right, thank you. That's a shrew. We don't have them here in Australia, but a lovely little animal that's kind of like a large mouse, something like that. And apparently we went from that to that. Now, I realise and acknowledge that people have a range of views about the beginning of life and understanding about how life began. Evolutionists have lots of questions for creationists. By the same token, creationists have some questions for evolutionists. And I have a question for Mr. Attenborough. Where is the evidence? What were the intervening stages? The bone structure of a shrew had to change dramatically. The muscle structure. Bats use high-intensity sound detection to find their prey. Shrews don't. How did that change come about? Again, if some shrews changed, why didn't they all change? And why aren't they changing now? Yes, it is magical that bats can fly. But my argument is that every part of a bat is designed for flight. Ladies, forgive me, a car illustration. I'm a male, I can't help it. Consider a base model Toyota Camry compared to a top-of-the-range Mercedes-Benz. They're both cars. They look somewhat similar. They both have four wheels, a chassis, a body, a steering wheel, seats. But the Mercedes-Benz will have lane assist, adaptive cruise control, collision avoidance, automatic wipers, luxury leather trim, heated and cooled front seats, etc., etc. One is more complex, one has more features and a higher level of engineering and design, but it does not mean that while they may look somewhat similar, they both have a body, a chassis, four wheels. It does not mean that a Mercedes-Benz came from a Toyota Camry. They come from different countries, different manufacturers, different designers, different engineers, made by different robots. They are designed from the ground up. And you can't take the chassis and the wheels of a Toyota Camry and build a Mercedes-Benz out of it. It will not work. There were very intelligent minds behind both vehicles, and the complexity of a car, even a Mercedes-Benz, is nothing compared to the complexity of a single cell. So my first point, don't believe everything you read or hear. Secondly, not all scientists subscribe to the theory of evolution. Some have real issues with it, and there are non-Christian and non-religious scientists in that group. Some of you may have read this book by John Ashton, an Adventist scientist who lives here right in Lake Macquarie district, just north of here. Wrote this book in 6 days, Why 50 Scientists Choose to Believe in Creation. And I picked up another book from Koorong just recently that had a similar theme to it. Here's another book that's really interesting to read. Let me just give you a brief history. Richard Dawkins, the famous Oxford atheist, wrote a book, The God Delusion, in 2006, basically arguing anyone who believes in God is deluded. 3 years later, David Belinsky wrote this book, which is a rebuttal or a response to Richard Dawkins' book. Now, David Belinsky wrote this book, The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. He is not religious. He's a secular Jew. He lives in France. He lectures in mathematics at a major university. And he argues in this book that there is no scientific foundation for evolutionary biology at all. Fascinating book to read. Heavy, but fascinating. So the second point is, not all scientists subscribe to the theory of evolution. My third point, if you leave anything to itself without any intervention at all, what happens to it? Does it get better or does it get worse? If you were to leave your house and move away and go to another part of Australia and nobody lived in that house for 50 years or 70 years, what would happen to the house? Would it get better or would it get worse? We know that in a matter of weeks there'd be dust and cobwebs and other stuff, and the paint would start, after a few years, the paint would start to peel, whatever. Whatever it is, a house, a car, even something alive. We are better at the beginning of life than we are at the end of life. We get old. We don't move as easily as we once did. Our skin gets wrinkles and so forth. Anything left to itself gradually decays rather than gets better. Evolution demands that major positive changes are happening all of the time. Hundreds of them, no, not hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of positive changes happening in the right order, at the right time, to get to the end results. For the shrew, skin between the fingers had to grow, the bones had to get lighter, had to develop a radar. Who or what is driving that process? Monkeys and apes turning into human beings. Hundreds of thousands of positive changes, all happening in the right order, all happening at the right time, in the right sequence. Everything has to get better on its own. No pattern, no designer, no engineer, nothing driving that process. Interestingly enough, the overwhelmingly vast majority of changes that happen in a cell result in the loss of valuable information, not the gain of information. And so we get people who get sick from unique diseases and so forth. To go from a reptile to a mammal would require millions and millions of positive incremental changes, all heading towards the same goal, with no one to guide that process. And finally, we do need to acknowledge that there is still much that we don't know, and we have to live with this tension. There are questions that we do not have answers to. Not everything is black and white for those of us who believe in a God-driven or a God-ordained creation. And we might have to wait till heaven till we get to that point. Pathfinders, I have a question for you. Who likes swimming? Going to the swimming pool, having a swim? I'm sure many of you do. On a hot day, not during the winter time, but on a hot day, there's nothing better than jumping into a pool and cooling off and having a swim. But think about this. When you jump into a deep pool, hopefully when you can swim and it's all safe, but when you jump into a deep pool, why is it that you don't fill up with water on the inside? And we've got holes, we've got through our nose, mouth, ears, other places. Why is it that we don't fill up with water? You put anything else in a pool with holes in it and it's going to fill up with water and sink to the bottom. But that doesn't happen with human beings. Why is it? Think about skin. Skin's an amazing thing, really is. You think about it. You put your lips together, just with your mouth, you put your lips together just lightly, and you have a perfect watertight seal. You don't have to really squeeze down. You just apply a little bit of gentle pressure, and you have a perfect watertight seal to stop water going into your lungs so that you would drown. That just happened by itself? Human beings have to go to extraordinary measures to make something watertight. You might have a watch that's waterproof, but that watch has been engineered, it's got rubber seals in it, it's been designed to make it waterproof. And yet our lips provide an amazing watertight seal just with very slight pressure. There is tension between creation and science, and we don't have all of the answers, but I don't believe that they're mutually exclusive. I find it fascinating that Ellen White, the Christian commentator from 100 or so years ago, in what I would argue is the best devotional book that's ever been written, Steps to Christ, the opening sentence makes this comment: nature, or science, if you want to use another word, nature and revelation alike testify of God's love. Not one or the other, both and. She goes on to say, our Father in heaven is the source of life, of wisdom, and of joy. Look at the wonderful and beautiful things of nature, she writes. Think of their marvellous adaptation. Yes, they do change, but in small ways, not large ways. Think of their marvellous adaptation to the needs and happiness, not only of human beings, but of all living creatures. She puts them together, nature, science, and revelation. The Bible says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Are we prepared to fully believe that statement? Let's bring our service to a close with the use of a beautiful hymn, hymn number 92. We'll stand and sing hymn number 92.